you for joining us. My name is Alicia Speri. I'm a reporter at The Intercept, and I'm here in Chicago at the People's Summit with Chase Iron Eyes. Chase is an activist, an attorney, a politician, a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. He is also a member of the Lakota Peoples Law Project and a co-founder of the Native American news website, Last Real Indians. Last year he ran for Congress, and he was also a regular presence at the Standing Rock protests. And as The Intercept has reported in recent weeks, Chase, as well as many other people that were at Standing Rock, were the subjects of a pretty invasive, massive surveillance and spying operation, really, by private security firm Tiger Swan, working with the Dakota Access Pipeline Company, as well as law enforcement. He was actually one of the activists that was most severely targeted in these documents, and he's here with us today to talk about his experience at Standing Rock. So thank you so much for joining us, Chase.
Thank you for having me.
And if you guys have any questions for him, you can leave your questions in the comments and we'll make sure they get to him. So let's just start with the surveillance. Did you know you were being followed?
I didn't know that I was being followed, not directly or particularly, but I knew from the state of, I saw the sort of the evolution of the info state there and the propaganda war that was being waged to win the battle of the public narrative. In the beginning, that belonged to, the activists or the protesters, the water protectors. But at some point, I knew that Morton County in North Dakota had retained the services of some body, some entity that knew exactly how to design the delivery of social media content to be highly effective and to paint the narrative so that the water protectors were villainized and law and order was only objectively being upheld. So I knew that, and when you're out there is no stoppage of fixed wing aircraft, helicopters, drones. In the night there's dark black drones, and so they are using all technologies available to surveil, to invade privacy, and really to put at question the strength of our constitutional liberties to speak freely, to be free from those invasions of privacy, and to be free from what I now know from what you're publishing, what The Intercept is publishing, is a further encroachment upon our rights. I mean, we are really being tested here, because I know now, looking back, and after I became involved in the pipeline resistance, I can see how I was being tailed. I can see how they were just keeping track of me, but I didn't adjust my behavior. I wanted to keep going forward. I felt, and I still feel, that our cause was righteous. It still is righteous. We were trying to do the right thing and the just thing, and we were using the power of peace and civil resistance. And here we find ourselves.
And it's so ironic they responded to that with the language of war and jihad. Even in some places they compare the water protector movements to foreign jihadis. And Tiger Swan is a company that has worked defense contracts overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they really bring that militarized language to Standing Rock. They talk about protesters as terrorists and the camp as a battlefield. How does that make you feel?
It's quite offensive. Especially just for offhand, they think that they have the context to call us jihadists rather than calling us members of the KKK or white supremacists. You see what I'm saying? They're framing the battlefield and the context, and because they have legitimate, this is a life and death organization here with real world experience in an actual oil war, in a theater of war in the Middle East, operating on our soil, on Native Nation soil, and on American soil with respect to United States citizens whose constitutional liberties are being stripped away by this marriage of corporate sponsored, highly financialized interests. The interests of the corporate state were able to kick into action the operation of the nation state and the states of our union to do their bidding. It was completely, I mean, I'm still traumatized over it. I'm facing 5 years in prison because of that, the marriage of the corporate state and our nation state. And right now, I'm not the only one. There's 40 others facing prison time. There's 815 people who were arrested. And they were able to craft this dynamic of law-abiding, law-upholding white citizens of North Dakota versus and against unruly and unlawful Native Americans. And they were able to successfully create that racial dynamic in violating everybody's rights. And what we have to realize is that all of our human rights, our birthrights, our natural rights, and our constitutional rights are put at risk. When we have this marriage, we're moving further and further towards a fascist state, and it's scary.
And just to remind you guys, I'm here at the People's Summit in Chicago talking with Chase Iron Eyes, who was one of the water protectors at Standing Rock, and as you said, facing charges for your involvement in those protests with hundreds of other people. So what happens for these people now? And also what happens to the battle against the Dakota Access Pipeline and other pipelines? I mean, do you consider that a loss?
It sits in a hard place for me just because I live on the Standing Rock Sioux Nation. I mean, I live downstream from the pipeline. We're raising our children south of the pipeline now. So if the pipeline breaks, we would move, but not everybody can afford to move. So I see the good, the strong, and the positive that has come from an international spiritual awakening. And for our people, our Americans, our world citizens, to begin to value things like water, to begin to utter things like Mini Wichoni, that water is sacred. Because not only is water sacred, but it's the foundation, the real foundation of national security, of all economic value. And the people who are willing to risk life and liberty to protect those common, God-given natural resources, which are our natural rights, those are the true patriots, the true American patriots. And the people who would inflict damage upon those resources and upon the people, persecute the people who are protecting it, those are the terrorists. So we have to keep pushing. People are facing charges. I'm helping to organize the movement to make sure everybody has legal protection. But we have to keep the fight going because the fabric and the heart and soul of our very democracy is at stake here.
Right, and we actually have a couple questions from readers that are very much connected to what you're talking about. We have Larissa Chandler asking, what lessons have you learned in your experiences? What would you do differently? Do you have any advice for other water protectors in other camps? And then we have a question from Rainer Ferenbacher, and what can we do to help your cause? And actually, I'll add to their questions. Okay. I mean, we're seeing here a native-led resistance movement. There has been native-led resistance for centuries, really, but what we're seeing now seems really quite unique, at least in more recent times, where we have a number of allies from a variety of different groups and affiliations following native resistance, native leadership on this front. So how's that experience going?
Those are great questions. First, I want to say that at some point when I noticed the level of sophistication go up astronomically in the pipeline fight, that was when I knew that, because they had a proper organization. Now, because of the huge breaking publications that the Intercept has engaged in, the arms and institutions of the corporate state, these private military groups who have experience in doing these private contracting, who are costing American taxpayers a lot of money, they will now know how to switch their tactics up, and they're very good at that. They're sophisticated. They can get in front of the game, so to speak. Whereas on the movement side or on the water protector side, it's purely organic. There is no top-down hierarchy. There are really no true leaders. Though they treated me and they pinpointed me as a leader, probably because of I had nerded out on all the history, the Federal Indian legal history. I had run for United States Congress, and I'm able to formulate the struggle in a way that it should relate to all of us. When we look around, everybody who's listening, you should consider America as your homeland. Even though, your ancestors may not have been here for more than 240 years. Our ancestors have been here for tens of thousands of years, but we know that this is our homeland. And so we're willing to sacrifice life or liberty or reputation or whatever it is to protect the land and the waters that we hold sacred. Now, we're calling on all of America to consider this your homeland, our homeland, these waters. These waters are sacred, and they are the foundation of our real national security. And the people who are trying to interfere with that, those are the people that we have to label properly, because they are interfering with a patriotic movement, one that protects the very source of our identity. The land and the waters are the very source of our identity. And we, as Americans, we have to, those are some of the truths that we should hold self-evident.
Right. And actually, the Standing Rock resistance has had an impact well beyond America, actually. We have a reader right now who's sending his greetings from Switzerland. It's Sebastian Diaz, and he's also asking you a question. He says, I'd like to know how the situation is now in North Dakota, especially around Lake Ojai, and in what legal measures are you guys taking to fight the injustice that the water protectors have faced?
So the Standing Rock Sioux tribe still has a claim in the courts. My focus individually has shifted, because I'm charged, because I'm facing 5 years in prison, because there are about 40 others facing those the same seriousness of charges. We are now trying to raise the resources to make sure everybody is provided for. And we're also looking beyond Standing Rock, because the truth is, the cold hard truth is that there is now a pipeline underneath the only source of our drinking water. And my kids, my 10-year-old son, when I took him out on the boat yesterday, and he said, Dad, is that pipeline under our river? And I had to tell him, yes, it is. I had to stomach that. Yes, it is. And he went silent, and you could tell that he could appreciate, even as an pre-adolescent, as a 10-year-old child, that his future was now at risk. So we've got to take that for what it is and move the energy and all the synergy that happened there, because people from all walks of life truly transcended whatever human classification we were born into, whether that's our skin color, our language, our religion, whatever human construct has been used to divide us, we were able to transcend it on behalf of something sacred, something so vital as water. So we have to take that, whether that's to other pipeline fights, the Sable pipeline or Line 5, which is actionable right now. There's people calling out to go to Line 5, whether that's in defense of our right to speak freely, or a journalist's right to tell the truth, to be free from illegal searches and seizures and surveillance. I mean, all of these rights are at risk right now. It's not. What's funny to me is, we were talking about how Tiger Swan's antics and activities were compared to the Pinkertons. And instead of, doing what most reasonable public relations folks would do, which was to get out ahead of that and try to combat that idea, they retweeted that idea, which means that the lines are being drawn. This isn't a conspiracy anymore. That the power of capital, the institutions and logic of capital, which have defined the very contours of our culture and law and order, are now blatantly saying to us, to the world, that this is the line. We are going to protect our right to drill. We're going to protect our right to frack, to poison all of our citizens' water for the benefit of private corporate profit. And if you want to resist that, even if you're willing to give your life or your liberty, we're going to put into action, corporate sponsored, state executed violence and persecution. That's what happened at Standing Rock.
And I want to catch up our audience that's just joining us on this. But what Chase is talking about is actually a series of stories we at The Intercept have been working on for the last few weeks. And I, with my colleagues, Aline Brown and Will Parrish, have been exposing really this massive surveillance program by private security firm Tiger Swan. And Tiger Swan has never responded to any of our requests for comment, but they did retweet, as you mentioned, this reader comment that compared them to the Pinkertons, which, in the late 19th century and 20th century were essentially known as, hired thugs for capital, really, against labor movements. And the fact that they seem to own that label is definitely disturbing.
It's amazing. And for some reason, I'm just not, maybe because our cause is righteous, I don't feel nervousness or sick to my stomach about facing 5 years in prison, even though I know that potentially North Dakota or Morton County could go to great lengths to try to make a statement by imprisoning somebody. And hopefully, and with the help of everybody who's listening, who's still paying attention, none of us will have to go down and be, persecuted for our patriotism, is how I like to view it. And so, we have to continue to tell the story, because we're just inching closer and closer. And we know, that there is an information or surveillance industrial state. We treat all of our communications, those of us who like to say we're woke about this type of thing, we treat it as if there is no expectation of privacy in any of our communications. Even though we use Signal or whatever the latest app is, we treat it all as if it's discoverable. Mm-hmm. And that's not right for a functioning democracy.
Right. And as you talked about the fact that you don't feel intimidated, you don't feel scared, but at the same time, we are seeing pretty massive efforts to repress dissent. We are seeing a number of states, including North Dakota, passing some really serious anti-protester bills. And is that going to have an impact at some point? I mean, some people will certainly be feeling the effects of this, no?
It is going to have a tremendous impact. Everybody has different levels of commitment. Everybody has different levels of risks that they're willing to take. But as we see in South Dakota, we saw in Oklahoma, the same type of criminalization of dissent, the same type of labeling people who are willing to stand up for water and land as quote-unquote eco-terrorists. You see some of that same language that comes from, Tiger Swan, labeling people, unarmed water protectors, as jihadists. You see that play out. That sort of culture plays out in real time when legislatures and governors are criminalizing the wearing of face masks. They're trying to relieve potential tortfeasors or relieve potential. They're trying to relieve liability of people that potentially run over a crowd of protesters
almost
in a road.
Them to do
yes,
so, right?
The same type of thing is happening in other states, and that's going to have a tremendous chilling effect. But sooner or later, I mean, this is just my personal opinion, but I can see, because water is life. When we talk about water and we talk about the lands around wherever people live, we can only be pushed so far. Obviously, they have no qualms about putting it out there that they consider those of us who are willing to protect land and water and sacred sites to be the enemy of capital. And we're not necessarily enemies of capital, but capital doesn't have compassion. And the kind of capitalism that has been propounded here and sold to us as progress is destroying the entire planet. And so if we don't stand up, then we all lose. But if enough of us stand up, then we have to believe that we can create this critical mass, so that the righteous and just cause will win out.
So that's why you're here at the People's Summit, I take it. How's the summit going? Have you been able to to speak with people about their work. What's your takeaway from it?
Yes, I was really encouraged, really strengthened to hear that the water protector movement is receiving all sorts of attention here. That's extremely important, and the type of people who come to the People's Summit. This is only the second year. I missed last year because I was running for United States Congress, and I mean, when you do that, it's all about it's about money. You're constantly trying to raise money, and you're just consumed by that. So I didn't get to come, but just being here for a day, you can tell that these are the people who are seeking this liberation. For me, foundationally, it's a spiritual liberation, but it leads us to logical conclusions that we need to seek political liberation and economic liberation in the sense that we law and order should be protecting the people in the land and the waters. Law and order shouldn't be protecting capital and property and the further stratification of our economic reality that is truly, it's imposed on us. But we're a long way from there. Right now we're talking about still who's on the left, who's on the right, which is fine. I mean, I consider myself a progressive. So when I come here, everybody who's on this path to getting woke finds themselves here. And so I just come here to share in that synergy and try to make the connections that I need to make.
And do you think that the progressive movement is learning its lessons? Are people listening more? Are people centering fights, like, for instance, native-led fights? Or do you think it's, there's still some
No, I think, the election of Trump, for a lot of us, a lot of the type of people who come to, the People's Summit, the sky was falling on November 9th, 2016. The sky was going to fall. That was visceral. I felt like that. But now, I mean, a couple weeks later, I started to realize, and after Trump tried to do a couple of things that offended the nature of a constitutional republic, and thankfully we have things like judicial supremacy, I began to say, okay, the sky's not falling. The battle for our democracy is still live. It's still winnable. And unless we begin to act, we will lose that war. And the corporate state will reign supreme, not only in our country, but around the globe. This is happening all over the globe. True people, true progressive people who want to put people over politics and profit, and land and water over politics and profit, are being opposed and actively persecuted by the forces of the corporate state.
And what are some of the fights you're carrying on at this point? You mentioned some of your work with people that were incarcerated and charged, Standing Rock protesters, but also you mentioned some other pipelines. Specifically, what are you looking at right now?
Right, specifically Line 5, definitely Line 5. Just Google it. It's near the Great Lakes. The Sable pipeline, Trans Mountain, and there's Kinder Morgan up in what is now Canada, and also the Keystone XL pipeline has been revived, and we're stuck in the 20th century. And when organisms are unwilling to evolve, then they face extinction. It's critical for us. I hear a lot of people here saying, like, we want to protect Mother Earth, we want to protect endangered species, and that that sort of philanthropic and noble endeavors. But it's not. Mother Earth isn't endangered. I mean, human beings, the human species, is endangered. We're the ones that will be wiped from the face of the earth unless we truly not only get woke in a political sense, but in a spiritual sense. We have to begin to value and understand and appreciate these sentiments and these statements, like water is sacred, because as science is bearing out, the original nations, who we now think of as Indian people or primitive people or indigenous people, we were all quote unquote indigenous at some time. I mean, there's really no such thing as white people or Indian people. You have different cultures, different original nations who had these connections to their food source, to their lands and to the cosmos, like sacred connections. And we need to, I don't know if we could revive that. I mean, all I'm trying to say is we were all colonized. And when it comes to something like water or the future of our planet, we need to transcend these human classifications and human constructs to come together. And just, we have to keep fighting.
For those of you that are just joining us, we are at the People's Summit in Chicago with Chase Iron Eyes from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. And we actually have a few questions from readers that are asking about fellow water protectors and what is happening to them. Specifically, somebody's asking for an update on Red Fawn situation. I don't know if you can speak to that, or if you can speak to the situation that other water protectors are facing.
Yes, so Red Fawn is facing some pretty significant time. They're charging her with possessing a felon in possession of a firearm, and their witness claims that they have a revolver with 3 expended casings, but there's also a gentleman known as Angry Bird Bravo 1, a brother named Izzy, different people. These are people that were involved in October 27th of disarming somebody who is recklessly endangering the campers at Ocheti Camp when the North Camp, or the Treaty Camp, was raided, and over 500 fully militarized law enforcement in conjunction with private oil mercenaries worked in tandem to arrest over 140 people. They charged over 140 people with felonies that day. The only, we are all still facing felony charges, and I'd be happy to, if you contact me, either through my own Twitter or through lakotalaw.org, to be able to put you in touch with the different organizations that are all trying to work together to make sure everybody's legal defense is adequately provided for. One felony to this date that went to trial ended up in a not guilty decision. The gentleman who was on trial for operating a drone, his name is Sean Turgeon, he chose a trial by judge rather than a trial by jury, because a trial by jury means a jury of Morton County residents, which is an extremely daunting prospect right now.
And you talked about this a little bit earlier, but for those of you that are just joining us now, the fight for the Standing Rock, the fight around Standing Rock was also a narrative fight, right? There was a very active counter-information campaign that we at the Intercept documented, and that very much shaped public perception of the protests.
They were able to, for instance, they had disseminated stories about Indians. I don't remember if they used the word Indians or, but they were clearly insinuating that reservation residents, Native Americans, were responsible for the killing of livestock, of local ranchers and farmers' livestock, for destroying property, and presenting a threat so that local ranchers and farmers had to carry weapons and firearms to protect their safety and their family's safety. And they even went so far as to cut and pay for airtime on local air stations and TV stations, showing these people, these wholesome looking people, Anglo people, looking like rural farmers and ranchers, carrying weapons, talking about how they were afraid for their lives. I mean, that's just one instance. And the other is, as you can see, it goes much deeper. As soon as the Intercept broke this story, there's a friend of mine did some research of his own. His name is Chris Hagen, and his story was published detailing how the girlfriend of the guy that I mentioned earlier, who recklessly endangered the lives of water protectors, and these other people stopped him from doing that. The water protectors who stopped Kyle Thompson from injuring anybody, those are the people facing felonies. Kyle Thompson is not facing a single thing, while his girlfriend leaked information that they were doing drugs, they were acting as agent provocateurs, they were setting fires to vehicles and trying to blame illegal activity on water protectors. And you could see it in the fight, in the struggle. You could see after something happened, Morton County would send a press release that was probably drafted by these private mercenaries, and it would appear on local news as the truth.
That's actually something that we at the Intercept are continuing to report on. I mean, the stories that we've talked about are the first of a long series. We'll definitely have way more to come on that, and we hope to speak with you again as we go forward in our reporting. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the work you do. I truly, I appreciate it, and we'll take courage.
How do you feel?
It's quite offensive, especially just for offhand. They think that they have the context to call us jihadists rather than calling us members of the KKK or white supremacists. You see what I'm saying? They're framing the battlefield and the context, and because they have legitimate. This is a life and death organization here with real world experience in an actual oil war, in a theater of war in the Middle East, operating on our soil, on Native Nation soil, and on American soil with respect to United States citizens whose constitutional liberties are being stripped away by this marriage of corporate-sponsored, highly financialized interest.
For him, you can leave your questions in the comments and we'll make sure they get to him. So let's just start with the surveillance. Did you know you were being followed?
I didn't know that I was being followed, not directly or particularly, but I knew from the state of, I saw the sort of the evolution of the info state there and the propaganda war that was being waged to win the battle of the public narrative. In the beginning, that belonged to, the activists or the protesters, the water protectors. But at some point, I knew that Morton County in North Dakota had retained the services of some body, some entity that knew exactly how to design the delivery of social media content to be highly effective and to paint the narrative so that, the water protectors were villainized.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Alicia Speri. I'm a reporter at the Intercept, and I'm here in Chicago at the People's Summit with Chase Iron Eyes. Chase is an activist, an attorney, a politician, a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. He is also a member of the Lakota Peoples Law Project and a co-founder of the Native American news websites Last Real Indians. Last year he ran for Congress, and he was also a regular presence at the Standing Rock protests. And as the Intercept has reported in recent weeks, Chase, as well as many other people that were at Standing Rock, were the subjects of a pretty invasive, massive surveillance and spying operation, really, by private security firm Tiger Swan, working with the Dakota Access Pipeline Company, as well as law enforcement. He was actually one of the activists that was most severely targeted in these documents, and he's here with us today to talk about his experience at Standing Rock. So thank you so much for joining us, Chase.
Thank you for having me.
And if you guys have any questions.
And law and order was only objectively being upheld. So I knew that, and when you're out there is no stoppage of fixed-wing aircraft, helicopters, drones. In the night, there's dark black drones. And so they are using all technologies available to surveil, to invade privacy, and really to put at question the strength of our constitutional liberties to speak freely, to be free from those invasions of privacy, and to be free from what I now know from what you're publishing, what the Intercept is publishing, is a further encroachment upon our rights. I mean, we are really being tested here, because I know now, looking back, and after I became involved in the pipeline resistance, I can see how I was being tailed. I can see how they were just keeping track of me, but I didn't adjust my behavior. I wanted to keep going forward. I felt and I still feel that our cause was righteous. It still is righteous. We were trying to do the right thing and the just thing, and we were using the power of peace and civil resistance. And here we find ourselves.
And it's so ironic they responded to that with the language of war and jihad. Even in some places they compare the water protector movements to foreign jihadis. And Tiger Swan is a company that has worked defense contracts overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they really bring that militarized language to Standing Rock. They talk about protesters as terrorists and the camp as a battlefield. How does that